Hi everyone, welcome to week 7 of the 2017 Oregon Conference Free Methodist Experience. This week we're going to be looking at the English Reformation and its impact upon the ecclesiology of churches. So ecclesiology is the church structure and governance, and so we're going to be diving a lot this week into especially how the Free Methodist Church is structured and how different parts of the Free Methodist Church relate to one another. And our journey this week starts with the English Reformation. These pictures are of Fountains Abbey, which is in a place Ripon in Yorkshire, near where I grew up. It was a thriving medieval monastery, a place of great spiritual growth and development. Was also very wealthy, in part because it controlled a large area of farmland, and it was destroyed by Henry VIII, the infamous King of England, with his 6 wives, in what's known as the dissolution of the monasteries, which is part of the English Reformation. So this whole journey of the English Reformation starts actually with Henry VIII, King of England, being a Catholic hero. So he was the King of England from 1509 to 1547. You can see how that really overlaps a lot with what we've been talking about with the Germanic Reformations on the continent. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli. Henry VIII is right in that time span. Now he starts off all this married to the Catholic Spaniard Catherine of Aragon. He marries her 1509 and she gives birth to their daughter Mary. Henry is at this point Catholic. At this point Luther hasn't even nailed his theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg, and it will still be another 8 years before he does. But when Luther does start arguing against the church, Henry doesn't change sides. Henry actually defends the Catholic Church. He writes against Martin Luther, and he earns the title Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith. And that's a title carried through by kings and queens of England right through to this day. So here is the back of a British £1 coin, and you'll see it says Elizabeth II DG Reg FD. And that stands for Elizabeth II, Deo Gloria Regina, by the glory of God Queen, Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith. So Elizabeth II, by the glory of God Queen, Defender of the Faith. And so the impact of Henry is going to be passed down through all the monarchs of England. They're all going to keep this title, Defender of the Faith, a title earned defending the Catholic Church against Luther because his writings were that great. He was a very intelligent, very athletic man in his youth, was Henry VIII. However, he ran into a problem. That was Catherine failed to produce a male heir. Understand that this politically was very dangerous in England in the 1500s. Various kingdoms in Europe were growing in strength, and the last time England had tried to have a queen, in Queen Matilda, the country had been plunged into civil war, with some lords supporting Queen Matilda, some supporting her brother Stephen, and there was quite a civil war around that. Some 200-300 years before. So it's quite a terrifying thing that Catherine hasn't produced a male heir. And so Henry tries to annul his marriage to Catherine, and Rome refuses. Henry sends his Cardinal Wolsey, to go see the papal legate in Avignon, who's a man who's been given the ability to act with the authority of the Pope in such matters. And Rome refuses the annulment. And so Henry decides to start a breakaway with Rome. First of all, he gets the universities on his side, the great universities of Oxford and Cambridge. And remember, at this point, Oxford and Cambridge, the very early universities, were founded as places of theological thinking. So Henry gets the universities declare his marriage to Catherine invalid. It never happened. He then declares himself in 1531 as head of the Church of England. And then in 1532, Henry gets all the bishops together who are part of the Roman Catholic Church in England and locks them in a room and says, look, you've all made a vow to the Pope and you've all made a vow to me, your king. Which comes first? Oh, and by the way, if you choose the Pope, I'll cut your head off. And that has longer term implications. Even today, there's many in the Episcopal Church or the Church of England that will argue that they never actually broke with Rome. They were only forced to break with Rome by the monarchy. And it's the monarchy that keeps them separate from Rome. But that's just something really important to just know about how Henry went around doing this split. And then in 1533, Henry really cements it all by secretly marrying Anne Boleyn. What I want you to understand here as we're going through these is, notice this isn't a theological debate. The English Reformation was very much for a political reason. And we just have to own that. We will come out of Methodism, which comes out of the Anglicanism, which was made by the English Reformation. We just have to understand this as part of our history, that it is a political break with Rome. We haven't really come out of the theological changes that happened on the continent. In fact, Henry's church is going to start off very Catholic, as we'll look at in a minute. But finally, things really get nailed into place in 1534. The Act of Succession declares Mary illegitimate. The Act of Supremacy makes England a sovereign state. Rome has no power. And then in 1536, Henry dissolves the monasteries, which makes him a very powerful, very wealthy man, because all their wealth and land he took and he profited from. I said this was a political separation, not a theological one. So initially, there's very little changes with regards to theology. Okay? Henry doesn't change theology. The only thing he changes is that instead of the Pope being in charge, the King is in charge. He still has 7 sacraments. He still has confession. He still has penance. He still has rosaries. And then along comes Thomas Cranmer, who's the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most senior cleric in England. And he pushes things towards more Protestant leanings, a more Lutheran understanding. This is why the Church of England sits more in line with Luther rather than Reformed or Baptist bits of the Reformation. It's because of where Cranmer pushed Henry, which was this more understanding rooted in Luther. And he comes up with the 39 Articles. And the 39 Articles are actually the source of our Articles of Religion. If you look chapter 1 of our discipline that you've been going through and reading those Articles of Religion, they are actually the 39 Articles edited very heavily by John Wesley. So you've actually seen a good chunk of the 39 Articles. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is this is a church defined not so much by its theology as by the fact that it is the church of all people in England. And so it caters to an incredibly wide number of people. It's going to have more Catholic people in it, and it's going to have people who are more with Cranmer and pushing for a more Protestant thing. And what develops over the coming century is the concept of a non-confessional faith. This is going to be really difficult for some of you to maybe grasp. You're used to an American approach maybe to faith where doctrine is very confessional, especially if you have come from Baptist or Reformed backgrounds where doctrine is all and teaching of doctrine. Church of England isn't going to have that. Yes, it has the 39 Articles, But you have seen as we've gone through this how little is in our articles of faith, how much is not in there. Instead, what's going to become important, especially under Queen Elizabeth I in the late 1500s and James I in the early 1600s, is the concept of unity through practice. Variance in theology, but unity in worship. This will especially come in through the Book of Common Prayer. You know, even if we have different stances regarding the second coming, you will use the Book of Common Prayer, so you all pray in the same way. The Book of Common Prayer initially came in 1549, and the most common version spoken about is the 1662 Book of Prayer under the Act of Unification. Also in part of this was the understanding of being able to read the Bible in your own language. The Lutheran influence came in there. And so the King James Bible eventually gets finished 1611 and is the first English translation of the Greek and Hebrew texts. What I want you to understand about this is what you're looking at is where our wide umbrella approach comes from that we've been talking about. All this wide umbrella, it comes from the Church of England here, trying to work out how to create unity when there's a wide spread of theology. It's in England that Puritanism will evolve, Quakerism, and all sorts of different leanings. And there's going to be an attempt in the Church of England to hold them all together. It's going to go under the name of the Via Media, the middle road. And the point of the middle road, the Via Media, is about how can we take all these different people with different understandings of God and bring them together as a unified church. So that's the Reformation and in England. And what we're going to look at now is specifically how it affected church governance, because that's where its impact really begins to work its way into Methodist understanding, because John Wesley was a clergyman of the Church of England. He was an Anglican. He was ordained an Anglican. He remained an Anglican for the rest of his life. He never defected from Anglicanism. He never broke communion with Canterbury. Never, ever in his life. He was Church of England. And so the Church of England structures that came out of the English Reformation directly impact Methodism. But for you to understand this, first of all, I have to introduce you to something called an episcopate. Okay? An episcopate is quite simple. It means a church hierarchy dominated by bishops. This is the traditional episcopate. So at the bottom you have priests and their congregations. Over them are the bishops. Over the bishops are the archbishops. And supreme top dog over them all is a pope or a patriarch in the early church. So you've got your top dog. The bishops, these blue ones, these bishops and archbishops, they are the seat of theology. They're the guardians of orthodoxy. And one of the benefits of that is priests and congregations get released for mission. So yes, it is a hierarchy, but different parts of the hierarchy have a different function. The Pope is in control. The bishops is where theology is done. Okay, so in a hardcore episcopate, it's not the job of a priest or a vicar to do theology. That's the job of the bishops. In fact, Church of England and the Catholic Church does not give job descriptions for bishops. When you become a bishop in the Church of England, you get to write your own job description. Do you want to go off and theologize on a certain topic and write books? Fine. Do you want to set up practical programs in communities? Fine. It doesn't matter. There's no job description for a bishop. but other than that, they are the seat of theology and the guardians of orthodoxy. Now you think that might be really weird and really like disempowering, but the whole point behind it is then local priests and local congregations are released for mission and practice, the heart of orthopraxis, okay, right living. The bishops sit and deal with the theology, with the thought processing, understanding the cross, the atonement, Trinity. And what they conclude is simply taught to the lower level so that the lower level can go do. And they're released for mission. And in the early church, there were 5 of these episcopates functioning side by side. Okay? So there were 5 patriarchs. There was Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. 5 patriarchies. And what happened in the Great Schism, as we looked at right back in week 3 now, the Rome episcopate broke off to form its own church, and the other patriarchs, 4 patriarchs, were left forming the Orthodox Church. Rome didn't want to be first among equals or even anything to do with equals. They wanted just to be their own thing, and so they broke off. And the other patriarchs stayed together as the Orthodox Church. So to this day, the Orthodox Church is made up of multiple episcopates. Hence why there's the Russian Orthodox, there is the Greek Orthodox, there is the Syrian Orthodox. Each one has a patriarch, and those patriarchs do talk to one another, but Rome maintains its independence as a solitary episcopate. So Henry comes along, and the church is dominated by this single episcopate under the Pope. Single Roman rule. There's the priests and the congregations who are doing mission, doing sacrament, living out life. Then there's the bishops, controlled by the archbishops, who are doing theology. And then there's the Pope, all in charge, coming into controlling everything. And what Henry does is he basically makes himself Pope. He doesn't really change anything in that episcopate, except he kicks out the Pope and just says whoever the monarch is, whoever the king or queen of England is in charge of the church in England. And in the Church of England, that is how things are to this day. The Queen is the head of the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the most senior cleric, but the Queen is the head of the church. Deo Gloria Regina Fidei Defensor. By the glory of God, Queen, defender of the faith. And that's the change Henry does. And so that is also the system Wesley was ordained, was a part of. In fact, every Methodist convert in England remained a part of the Anglican Church. Methodism was something you did on top of the Church of England. And so this is the episcopate they inherited. Now what Wesley starts to do when the Church of England leaves America and he has to work out what to do with all his followers in America, because they now have no Church of England, and he has to form an actual Methodist church, is Wesley takes this episcopate and he alters it. There is no monarch. So he just does an episcopate without a monarch. But now here is the important thing to note. Okay? He doesn't have any bishops. He has some ordained leaders, but he doesn't have any bishops. And he has also noticed, as he's gone through the evangelical royals, that the brilliance of lay people in leadership. And so he tweaks the system. You know, at the bottom, there's still ministers, congregations, his presbyters, Wesley would call them. We would call them pastors in United Methodist Church or the Great British Methodist Church. They'd be known as ministers. That local congregational level stays pretty much the same. But in place of the bishops, which Wesley doesn't have, he creates a conference. And the conference is a gathering of both lay and ordained people to discuss theology and resolve matters of church discipline and all that. So in other words, the job previously done by the bishops, which was the seat of theology, is now done by a conference. And the conference is under a president or superintendent. But note this, whereas archbishops were over bishops, in a conference system, the president or superintendent is merely a first among equals with the ordained members of the conference. So a superintendent is the first among equals. And you get a few different variants on this. So in England, you'll also get, they have a president of conference, which is ordained, and they have a vice president of conference, who is lay, so that the ordained and lay is even at that level of leadership. Things are mostly done by election, which actually isn't anything new. Bishops had done stuff by election for a long time. Right back to the Council of Nicaea. Okay? But the job of the bishop is now done by the conference, which is a mixture of lay and ordained people. But hopefully you can see how the two very much relate to one another. Now, what happened in America, though, was that one conference wasn't enough. In England, to this day, there is only one conference. That's the whole country. America, though, was so big, it needed multiple conferences. So, here's one conference in one part of the country. But the distance traveled to go meet as conference once a year, every year, was just too much. I mean, if it took 6 months to get from Seattle to Chicago, once a year, as soon as you get to one end, you've got to start going back the other way. You'd never get anything done. So the country got broken up into many conferences, who would then meet as a general conference. You'll notice here, though, how the colors have changed. That blue conference that was the place of the bishops is now in the place of general conference. And the purple conferences, what we would call annual conferences, don't really have that bishop role quite so much. They still do a lot of church order, keeping churches in line, connection and that. But the general conference is now where theology is done, and that's done once every 4 years. Part of the practical side of that for today is it is only general conference that can alter the Book of Discipline. We, as the Oregon Conference, cannot change the Book of Discipline. It has to be done at the general conference. And even then, the general conference cannot change the articles of religion. That needs a world conference, which is a meeting of all of our general conferences together, which includes the US, Brazil, India, Rwanda, Haiti. All those general conferences, all those bishops have to meet together to be able to change the core articles of faith. You'll notice, though, the astute among you, that we have bishops. And you're sat there going, wait, if the conference fulfills the role of bishop, why do we have bishops? Now this comes down to the story of Wesley and American Methodism. When Wesley was setting up American Methodism, after the Church of England left because of the War of Independence, he brought over a guy by the name of Francis Asbury and another guy by the name of Cook. And Wesley wanted Cook as superintendent. Cook wanted to be called a bishop, and the conference, the first Christmas conference, voted him to be superintendent, and then the same day voted for him to become bishop. Wesley didn't like that. Wesley really didn't like it, but couldn't stop it. Actually, Wesley's brother would get really annoyed on the issue, and he would even, being the musician who wrote so many hymns, Charles Wesley, he even wrote a verse in one of his hymns which said, "Wesley his hands on Cook hath laid, but who hath laid hands on him?" Talking about the break in apostolic succession with regards to bishops. But the reality is, we use the term bishop to describe a general conference superintendent. The job of a bishop is actually done by the general conference. Now, this is on a very macro scale. This is organizing people on a national level, this conference episcopate. Notice that theology is still done nearer the center, and the local congregations are released for mission. They're released for orthopraxis. Okay? Correct action. And so let's have a look a little more at that. Because here's the thing, even within a local Free Methodist church, this releasing for action happens within an episcopate model. Because a Free Methodist church looks very similar to a conference. You have all the people, all the parts of a church ministry, the congregation, the members, the non-members, the building renters. And they'll take part in, above them is the society meeting, which is only the members of the church. And then representing the society meeting, when it's not in session, is the board of administration. Okay? So just as there's whole congregations who send delegates to conference, here there's all these people that are part of the church, and then it's the members who meet as the society meeting. So you get a micro version of the episcopacy in the local church. What you then get is an exchange between the conference and the society meeting. So the society, the church, will send members as delegates to conference where theology is done. So little old biddy Anne can go be part of the bishopric of doing theology in this conference if she's the lay delegate. Or young Bob, or whoever, they can be part of that process. The conference then also provides pastor to the society. When you become an ordained elder in the Free Methodist Church, your membership is in the conference, not the church. So I am an ordained elder in the Oregon Conference of the Free Methodist Church. Even though I pastor Falls City, I am not a member of Falls City. Okay? So what I want you to... I apologize. What I need you to realize here is the church is both congregational and episcopal. There's a certain level of autonomy the church has in itself, and we get to push people up the chain towards conference. Pastors also come down the chain. So we're not purely episcopal, we're also congregational. And that's Wesley putting in this piece about equality of ordained and lay, and how lay people can contribute to the gospel and the spreading of the kingdom of God. So I hope my words haven't distracted you from my visuals this week. The visuals really simplify this into all you really need to know to get the basic framework. But what does this mean practically? What is it about this conference-based episcopate that really gives some qualities of free Methodism? Well, first of all, it means, as you can tell, both ordained and lay people are involved at every level of church decision making. There is no body within Free Methodist Church that does not involve both ordained and lay. From your local church board, where an ordained pastor from the conference sits as chair. Pastor sits as chair, even though they only have a vote in the event of a tie. Right through to annual conference, where you have at least one delegate for every ordained person in your church. Through to the meg board, where we have both an equal number of ordained and lay. So lay people get a say in who gets ordained. Through to general conference, where theology is done and the discipline can be changed. You have pastors sat next to lay people, both voting. Through to the general denominations board of administration. The board of administration that represents the general conference, or the board of bishops as it's known. Equal numbers of lay and ordained. What this means, though, in part, especially, you must understand this for when you are running a church, especially if you become a senior pastor. It means the senior pastor in a Free Methodist church is not the be-all and end-all. The buck does not stop with them. You sit as chair of your church board, but you only have a vote in the case of a tie. Okay, you cannot make the board agree with everything you want to do. You do not reign supreme. You cannot just command and it be done. There is accountability on all levels. This is corporate decision making. We are very much communal in how we make our decision making. Practically, this also means there's a balance between episcopal authority and congregational autonomy. If we were purely episcopal, then the bishop could tell the superintendent, who could tell me what to do as a pastor, and then I could tell my congregation, and that's that. But because we also have this congregational autonomy coming up from the bottom, there's accountability to those higher up. So yes, there's stuff that comes from the top down, but accountability also goes from the bottom up. And that will become very important on issues of discipline. Where there's this kind of intersection between accountability and top-down orders. So for example, the person who kicks off a discipline issue with a pastor is the delegate within the church, a lay person in the church going to the meg board. So accountability goes up as well as stuff coming, episcopal authority coming down. Also means there's an importance of networking and reaching outside of your church. Okay, this is, as you're beginning to realize, hopefully, there's a whole lot of communal, of corporate work in here. And I don't mean corporate in a business sense, I mean corporate in terms of relationship and communal decision making. That means if you're the senior pastor of a church, you can't just function and as if you're the only thing. You can't just while away the hours patting yourself on the back and talking about how great your church is and working and isolating yourself from the other churches. We are a conference, not an assembly of individual churches. We work together to make each other stronger. That means you have to be in relationship with the other senior pastors. That means you have to care about each other's ministries. That means you have to be willing to consider, can I help them in any way? Do I have resources that will be better used over in this other church? Do I have giftings or people who I can send to help this church out? Can we do shared events to have more success rate? How can we network? How can we build together? This is one of the greatest things you will be able to achieve out of annual conference when you go, is that you get a chance to meet and get to know people and start relationships. Because it's the more people you have relationships with, the more contacts you have, the stronger you can be in networking and pulling churches together. And that's one of the strengths of this conference, Episcopate. It is so communal, but you do need to understand that as it is so communal, you have to engage that communal aspect. You cannot stand out as an island on your own. You will stand out for the wrong reasons as well as the right reasons. It also means, though, you have a support system as church leaders and church laity. As a pastor, I know the superintendent's got my back. I can bounce ideas off fellow Free Methodist Conference pastors. I chat with them all the time. We talk about our situations. And, there's very few people who can truly understand the stresses and strains of being a pastor who are not a pastor themselves. And so we get to be a safe sounding board for one another. And we get to support and build each other up. It also means, though, for church laity, you have a support system. If you get a pathetically poor pastor, you have a way of being backed up and the conference going, yeah, that was not a good idea. Let's deal with this. Or if your pastor goes off and sleeps with 17 women, you have a way of saying, discipline, without needing to stress about, how do I phrase this? Without needing to be completely on the shoulders of the congregation, because the conference can step in and back the congregation up. So you don't need to worry about the pastor squirming their way out of it, because the conference can just come in and deal with it on behalf of the regular lay church members. There we go. So that's some of the practicalities of understanding this episcopate. There's been a whole lot of things along the way, and might seem a little dull. It's not very theologically revealing necessarily, but it's important to who we are, that you understand this conference system, that you understand it comes from an episcopate, that you understand that the conference serves the role of a bishop in many church groups, that we have this balance between ordained and lay, this balance between episcopal authority and congregational autonomy, and that we are a communal decision-making body. There is no centralization of power in an individual. It is communal decision-making, family, unity of the body of Christ, coming together and deciding what to do as one. That's the broad picture, though. Alas, you do need to start familiarizing yourself with the details. So your wonderfully dull reading this week is the discipline. Chapters 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Skip over the paragraphs that you read on ordination in week 1. Okay? This is your only reading this week. Okay? Discipline chapters 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. It will not be a gripping read. Most of it is procedural, dry, qualifications for a superintendent, qualifications for a bishop, job of the MEG board, job of the MAC board, what to do if your church is attached to a school, processes for church planting. But you need to familiarize yourself with it as part of this course. It's who we are. But what I want you to see is you shouldn't get bogged down in the details. What I really want you to grasp is this very broad picture, and to start learning to engage on a deeper level this this conference-based episcopate and just start pulling out some more details and trying to work your way through it. You might well need to ask your mentors a few questions on things this week. And do pay attention to some things. The discipline, even though it is as written, it is a little bit flexible. There is a paragraph in one of the chapters where it says, this is what is recommended, but we realize our churches have a lot of contexts. And so we realize that there might need to be some tweaking to how a church is run to fit that context. You'll also notice there's some paragraphs that have a little plus sign by the numbers. Those are the paragraphs that can be tweaked depending upon context. But I'm going to make you read all this anyway, because you need to know it as pastors. It is important to our identity. I know it's boring. So to make sure you've read it, I'm going to ask you plenty of questions. So after reading through the discipline chapters this week, what do you like about the way the Free Methodist Church is organized? 100 words, they're short answers this week. What do you not like, or what do you like the least about how the Free Methodist Church is organized? What do you not understand about how the Free Methodist Church is organized? You're going to be reading a lot this week, a lot of procedural stuff. You might sit there and go, why on earth does this committee exist? Why do we have instructions upon this thing? What is the need for this in a church? Why is this being done this way? Why are these the requirements for someone to stand in this role? Okay? There will probably be stuff you don't fully understand as to who, what, where, how, and why. This is the week to read and to ask those questions. Then there's a couple that are a little more trying to tweak out that you've read some of the important bits. So briefly explain what you understand the process to be for appointing a new pastor to a church. Have your answer refer to both the outgoing and ingoing pastor. I'll give you a hint. Paragraph 5220. 125 words. And then an ordained member of your church is being disciplined dun, 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 for behavior contrary to their ordination vows. Oh la la. Briefly explain what you understand to be the process that they will go through. I'll give you another hint. Chapter 7. Okay, so yes, your week might be dull and boring, but you will become intimately familiar with the Book of Discipline. I do recommend don't sit down and read it all in one go. You might want to break up the reading into a few different sections. But with that said, I will leave you to it, and I will see you online. Bye, everyone.